So let's talk about hypersecretory or secretory diarrhea and the type of drugs that we can use for them. Um, Enterotoxins play a big role in secretory diarrhea. We've talked about this in the anti-inflammatory chapter um, with a particular drug that hopefully you'll remember as we come across it. And this enterotoxins are produced by an overgrowth of bacteria that are in the GI tract, and there is some condition that has decreased the amount of good bacteria and left this bad bacteria that then produces the endotoxin. The endotoxin then causes hypersecretion in the GI tract. It just inflames the GI tract, and a lot of fluid can be lost this way. This is a map of an outbreak from E. coli, and this is probably the one associated with the Chipotle outbreak, where they had the restaurant Chipotle had people coming down with this E. coli based illness, and diarrhea was one of the major things, and dehydration. Some people ended up in the hospital, so it can be quite serious. We all have E. coli in our GI tracts. I just want to state that, but it is a particular type of E. coli that doesn't occur normally. It's something that we ingest. So, the enterotoxins or endotoxins, they're called both names, cause this inflammation, and the important thing is to not let the secretory diarrheas become exudative. Exudative diarrheas are where we start to break down the mucosal layer. We get sometimes hemorrhaging of blood, and then also proteins and other nutrients that are in the bloodstream will come out um, into the ingesta, and then it's excreted, and then the animal has lost more than just fluids. So something really important, especially like parvovirus or transmissible hemorrhagic gastroenteritis in pigs causes this. It can just be really, really bad. So what do we have to fight this secretory type diarrhea? And what we have are three basic things here, and they are bismuth subsalicylate, otherwise known as Pepto-Bismol, flunixin meglumine, which we've talked about in the anti-inflammatory chapter, otherwise known as banamine, and sulfasalazine, azulfidine. And hopefully that sulfasalazine has a familiar ring to it. So as does hopefully this drug. So bismuth subsalicylate. It's mainly known as Pepto-Bismol, and let me see if there's kaopectate used to have a different formulation, but it's basically taken over this type of. This is their active ingredient. Is this bismuth subsalicylate? So bismuth is an ingredient that coats the mucosa. This provides a barrier between the endotoxin and the mucosa so that it won't cause that secretory effect. Salicylate is related to aspirin, if you remember salicylic acid, and it's an anti-secretory type of ingredient. It's the thing that we think really causes the difference in giving this drug. It is well absorbed, so we have to be careful in cats and dogs to use the recommended dose because we can cause toxicity. It's an NSAID, basically. We're causing toxicity with it. But if we use it at the regular formulary doses, it shouldn't cause that problem. It can cause melena, so the ingredient, the bismuth, tends to cause this dark tarry look to it. It's not because there's bleeding, it's just because it becomes dark, it becomes oxidized and dark. And the taste of Pepto-Bismol may not be that great for animals, so we'll sometimes use these chewable tablets as long as they don't have xylitol in them, or we refrigerate the liquid, and that seems to make it go down better. If an animal is being given an X-ray, it will be radio opaque. It will appear in the X-ray. Flunixin So flunixin we've talked about this drug before as an anti-inflammatory, but it also has this anti-endotoxin effect and anti-prostaglandin. So it is really good for situations where we are thinking there's an endotoxin in effect. And we need to be careful in using this in dogs and cats. We don't tend to use it very often. If we do, we don't use it for very long. But it's very good for use in horses and cattle. Sulfasalazine. So sulfasalazine has a salicylate molecule, which is mesalamine. And it also has, and so that's the salazine part. And then it has a sulfa part. And the sulfa part is actually an antibiotic, a sulfa drug, antibiotic. We don't use it for that antibiotic part of it. It is just cleaved off of the salazine part. And I will say, probably in the future, there's going to be a push to just have the salazine, the mesalamine part, if at all possible, so that we don't have the bad side effect of the sulfa part of it. The sulfonamide antibiotic portion causes dry eye, keratoconjunctivitis sicca, which is a disease where you have to give eye drops many times a day, 4 to 6 times a day is kind of what you end up having to replace the animal's tears. There is a surgery you can do to help with this, but we would rather prevent things rather than cause them. It decreases the salicylate part decreases prostaglandin formation, and it can be used for ulcerative colitis, where we are cutting down on the inflammation. I know the salicylate sounds like, well, that's an anti-inflammatory, but it could also cause ulcers, but it seems to help in this situation in the colon because it's more in that part of the body. That's a pretty bad ulcerated GI tract there. So for diarrhea, we can also use ondansetron, which we talked about as being an anti-emetic as well. And just because it hits on those 5-HT3 receptors on the chemoreceptor trigger zone. And it also blocks them in the GI tract so they don't send a signal to the chemoreceptor trigger zone. And what it does in the case of diarrhea, it will decrease secretion of chloride ions. Chloride ions are charged and they will have an osmotic effect and bring water along with them. So it's not that powerful used all by itself, but used in combination with other things, it can help with decreasing diarrhea. So some other things, we've talked about protectants. If you remember, just back a slide or two, Pepto-Bismol has the bismuth in it that will be a protectant, keeping things away from being absorbed by the GI tract. But we also have some things called adsorbents, and adsorbents was the idea of adsorbing. So this is making things stick to something that then is carried out of the body and carries this thing we want to stick to it out of the body. And we have used that. That was what the active ingredient, kaolin, pectin, clay was the active ingredient in kaopectate. They no longer use that formulation. They don't think that's as effective as basically something similar to what Pepto-Bismol uses. We don't use activated charcoal so much because that's really not a very effective way to control diarrhea. If we have toxins, it may help in preventing some of those toxins to get through, but or be absorbed, but that's not usually something we're looking for with treatment of diarrhea. It's interesting to note that liquid barium that you might use for a contrast radiograph when you're looking to see how fast the GI tract is moving things through it, and you're looking to see if there's a blockage. Sometimes administering liquid barium, if an animal has diarrhea, will seem to resolve it, at least for a while, unless there's an underlying cause, it's going to bring it back. And then I want to make mention of this ditrioctahedral smectite. It is a type of clay, basically, and it's used in a product called Biosponge, and I think there's some other products out there. This is a product that is used in horses after they've had colic surgery, and it basically is mopping up endotoxins in animals, in horses that have had GI tract surgery. So it's placed in there before closing the GI tract up if there's been a surgery into the GI tract. And it's just a way to adsorb those endotoxins and seems to be fairly effective.